Oh, patch 4.7 dropped. Let's see what this new Dainsleif quest is all about. Vedrfolnir does stand between the eyes of a giant unnamed eagle in Norse mythology, and his name, when broken down, can be translated into Vidr, meaning storm, and Folnir, which means the one who sees hidden things. In Genshin, there is only one character who has the ability to see all hidden things, and that, oh boy, happens to be the Sinner. However, we will likely have to wait at least until the end of Natlan to know whether the Sinner is Nibelung or Vedrfolnir. It will probably end up being some random new character we never heard about before.
A few moments later.
The Sinner you wish to know about, his situation is different. He and his fellow sinners have long betrayed me, and long betrayed their nation. His name is Vedrfolnir, the Visionary. I'm loath to admit it, but he is also my kin, my older brother.
Alright, damn, that was a lot faster than I expected. Okay, so the latest Archon Quest Bedtime Story was good. At least when strictly speaking in terms of world building, it's really good. It's so good that while I was playing it, I realized that a single video will not do the quest justice. Therefore, instead of a conventional lore theory, I will for the first time start by doing a complete quest recap and analysis of it. Also, I will include some of my personal thoughts later in the video, but first, let's get straight to the quest itself. The interlude Archon Quest Bedtime Story starts, as most interlude quests do, with the Traveler and Paimon taking a commission from Catherine at the Adventurers Guild. Catherine tells the two that a person, likely a young man, went missing around Vimara village, and oddly enough, none of the residents know the missing person's name. So our two protagonists go on to Vimara to investigate the situation. Now, I don't normally do this, but for the sake of simplicity moving forward, I will be referring to the Traveler as Aether and to the Abyss Sibling as Lumine. If your own Traveler is Lumine, then just swap the two names whenever you hear me saying either of them. You're gonna see why I'm doing this later in the video. Aether and Paimon reach Vimara and begin to inquire the villagers about the identity of the person they are looking for. But something doesn't seem quite right. The villagers don't seem to be able to form a coherent recollection of the missing individual, and can only remember fragments of memory about him, almost as if they are describing a fairy tale character that they all imagined a little differently in their head. Aether starts to become suspicious of the situation, thinking that it could be a case similar to that of Greater Lord Rukkhadevata, and that the person they are looking for might be someone who only exists inside of people's memories. The duo then meet an absolutely adorable sweetheart called Atossa, who takes them to a tree near the village and then tells them how she was an orphan adopted by the villagers. Because of that, she didn't really have anyone to talk to when she was really happy or bothered by something, until she met this missing person that neither she nor the villagers can remember, who apparently was to her both like a good friend and a family member she can trust. Aether tells Atossa that he understands how she feels, of course referring to the fact that he too misses Lumine, to whom he could confide his true feelings. Atossa describes to Aether and Paimon how the guy they are looking for is a very kind and thoughtful person who always tries to help others. Then she points out that the last time she talked to him was next to this tree of interest during the exact same time of sunset. Whenever they talked, time would pass slowly, with the sun itself remaining in the same position in the sky for hours. The group then get into an altercation with a bunch of abyss mages, after which they notice how nearby hilly trolls are acting abnormally. This leads Aether to conclude that what's going on in Vimara village might be due to the Abyss Order meddling with the local ley lines of the area. A few minutes later, we come across Dainsleif, who conveniently is also investigating the Abyss Order around Vimara village. Atossa departs the group while Dainsleif, Aether, and Paimon discuss the situation. During their conversation, Dain asks Aether if he believes that Lumine betrayed him, to which Aether replies by saying that he still has faith in his sister. Dainsleif then remarks that this is a good thing, as he believes that there is still room for reconciliation between Aether and Lumine, unlike the state of affairs between him and his older brother, the sinner Vedrfolnir. And after that, Dain goes on to mention a very important detail, so pay attention. He possibly reveals the identities of the 6 pygmies from the Pale Princess and the 6 pygmies, and they are himself, Dainsleif the Twilight Sword, his older brother, Vedrfolnir the Visionary, Hroktatir, the wise, Rheindaughter, gold, Surtaloji, the foul, and finally, Rerir, the moon hunter, also known as Rachel of Solnari. These 6 individuals were once people of great esteem in Khaenri'ah, and had they worked together, they could have halted the Vinster King from rocking the foundations of the world. However, as it turns out, 5 of these heroes harbored evil in their hearts, and thus could not resist the call of the Abyss. They divided amongst themselves a world-shattering power that turned them into transcendent beings, becoming the 5 Sinners of Khaenri'ah. When the cataclysm struck the kingdom, not one of them stepped up to offer the godlike power they held for the sake of saving Khaenri'ah. Infuriated by their betrayal, Dainsleif vowed to hunt them down and exact revenge for their treachery. Now, don't get your hopes up. Aside from Dainsleif, it's actually unlikely for any of the aforementioned characters to become playable. I will elaborate on why that is the case in the analysis section, but let us get through the quest recap first. Aether, Dainsleif, and Paimon realize that the missing person they are looking for around Vimara village has the ability to implant false memories in the minds of people after Dainsleif suddenly remembers, giving him the eye of the first field tiller, which obviously made no sense. The group go to the eye's hiding spot, fully aware that the Abyss Order are likely on their track. And on the way to the hideout, Dane feels a headache, but brushes it off and enters the ruin while saying that they are running out of time. As they suspected, the Abyss Order were indeed right behind them, so Dainsleif asks the Traveler and Paimon to return to Vimara and look for the missing person, while he stays behind to take care of the Abyss Order. In truth, Dane knew that this was the only way to lure out the Abyss Sibling, which in my case is Lumine, and have a conversation with her. Interestingly, Lumine praises Dane's power, claiming that when he is not holding back, no army could possibly stand in his way. Then she does the most logical thing anyone would do after making such a statement, which is challenge him to a fight. In the meantime, Aether and Paimon return to the outside world, or so they think, and find it that it's almost time for sunset, and that all the agitated Hilitrolls in the surrounding area suddenly became calm and serene. So the two return to the village, but to their surprise, the villagers who commissioned them to help find the missing person they can't remember forgot that the man was missing to begin with. After rehashing the guy's description and attributes, which they gathered from earlier, one of the villagers realizes who they are talking about and points them to his whereabouts. This completely confuses Aether and Paimon, because it seems as if they went back in time to a point before the man they are looking for went missing. But something feels off about this whole thing, since going back in time is not an easy feat. After discussing it, they remember what Dainsleif told them about the Ley Lines being able to alter people's memories, and the two realize that the issue must lie there. At the beginning of their investigation, Aether and Paimon realized that the people could not fully remember the person they were looking for, as if he was a character that existed only in their minds, a fairy tale character they once heard about. They then remember what the girl they met from earlier, Atossa, told them about her experience with our mystery guy. When talking to him, it felt that time itself moved slower and that the sun remained in the position of sunset, which is exactly the time they are in right now. Since they knew the missing man could implant false memories from their experience with Dainsleif thinking he gave him the eye of the first field tiller, Aether and Paimon realized that they didn't go back in time, but rather entered the only place where the missing man can exist, someone's memory of him, which he himself must have implanted. And here's the catch. Unlike normal memories, false memories are not actual events that took place in real life. They are highly imperfect, and because of that, time cannot move inside them, because if it did, people would start to correlate them with real actions they did around that same time, which would lead to huge inconsistencies between the real memory and the false one, exposing it in the process. And given that it was sunset, the memory that Aether and Paimon were in had to be that of Atossa. So Aether and Paimon look for her around the tree she showed them earlier and find her chatting with a handsome young lad whom she is clearly into. The man immediately recognizes Aether as the Traveler and pulls him into his domain, which, unlike the one Pereware took us into, is this time explicitly confirmed to be a realm of consciousness, akin to the ones that Baal, Beelzebul, and Morax can make. Also, just to be clear, I am not saying that Pereware's domain isn't a realm of consciousness. In fact, I highly suspect that it is. It just hasn't been confirmed yet. Regardless, let's be real, it most likely is one. Anyway, inside the domain expansion, Aether realizes that the man they have been after all along was the son of Clothar, Caribert Albrecht, and he in turn recognized Aether from Lumine's memory. So just to be clear, he understands that the Traveler lived through the Abyss Siblings' encounter with him and Clothar. Caribert then explains how he was made from his father's recollection of him as a basis for the Loom of Fate, which he could fully control and use to weave the ley lines like silks of thread. He also acknowledges that implanting memories of himself in the minds of the villagers was wrong, but he did it nonetheless due to his desire for wanting to have a life of his own. Because in truth, the real Caribert died a long time ago, and the one we talked to is just a memory created in his likeness for the sake of the Loom of Fate. As a matter of fact, the only reason we can talk to him is because the Loom of Fate was successfully completed, and he elaborates on this by explaining that back when Dainsleif felt his headache outside of the hideout, Caribert implanted a false memory in his mind of him giving the eye of the first field killer to the Traveler so that Dane would let his guard down once the Traveler leaves, which is when Lumine would come in and snatch the eye from him. Caribert then tells the Traveler that he needed the Loom of Fate to be completed because after Clothar used Vedrfolnir's blessing to awaken him, he recalls feeling an immeasurable amount of mental anguish and only calmed down after hearing the fairy tale that his father told him. So Caribert used the Loom of Fate to tell the Hilly Trolls a fairy tale of his own, so that he too could calm their suffering. This baffles Aether, who looks at Caribert, a child denied his life, standing in front of him, holding in his hands such tremendous power to control the very fabric of the world that abandoned him. Yet, all he did was use it to grant a few Hilly Trolls a moment of peace in their miserable lives. Because Caribert, by his own words, as someone who lost the right to exist in the world, could not allow himself to change it and deny that choice to those who still live. And so, the bedtime story was over. Well, no, not really, because Lumine shows up just in time for Caribert to disappear and has a very heartfelt conversation with Aether. Now, I will discuss this conversation in my upcoming theory on the Five Sinners of Khaenri'ah. There will be a link to it in this video once it's out. But for now, there isn't much to recap other than they talked. Although, one thing that is worth pointing out is that the Abyss Sibling, in this case Lumine, calls out the Traveler by his real name, Aether, and Aether tells her how she is the only one that calls him by that name. This is cool because it is the first time where the Traveler actively acknowledges that their name is either Aether or Lumine, of course in this case Aether, and that confirms that the two siblings are canonically Aether and Lumine, not some bullshit like Lumine and Blowjob Master 47 or Lumine and Gertrude 28, no offense to any Gertrudes watching, or some of these names I sometimes see where they have their phone number and then some weird Japanese symbols that make no sense. Anyway, Aether and Lumine speculate that the Heavenly Principles must be in a dire state for not doing anything to stop Neuvillette from reclaiming the Hydro Authority, but without Caribert, the realm of consciousness collapses, leaving the two siblings with no memory of their encounter there, and the Traveler wakes up to Paimon telling him that Dainsleif came to check on them earlier then left alone. What's interesting is that the villagers now remember Caribert, and recount how the last time they saw him was when he was sleeping under a tree in the distance, when a man and a woman came to wake him up and walk with him to the sunset. So even though he never truly existed in reality, he was still there in the memories of the villagers, even if but for a very short part of their lives. Someone, somewhere, will remember Caribert. And then we go to check on Atossa, who proceeds to kill me from laughter when she says that she thinks Caribert dumped her. Bro, this NPC is so adorable. And yeah, that's about it. That's where the quest ends. And now, well, time for some analysis. I have seen many people complaining about and or criticizing the quest for various reasons, some going as far as to call it the worst Archon Quest in all of Genshin Impact. And while I personally don't give enough of a shit to waste my time arguing over a video game quest, I am just gonna say this. Even if you genuinely think the quest was bad, in terms of raw world building, it had a lot. And that's really what I care about. And speaking of world building, let's start by addressing the elephant, or I should say the hawk, in the room. Dainsleif's older brother, the man behind all of these events so far, Vedrfolnir. You see, in the last theory I made, I talked about the possibility of the one whom Skirk calls the Visionary to be the sinner who talks to Clothar. I primarily based this prediction on a combination of lines of dialogue by Mona and Skirk from the Archon Quest Masquerade of the Guilty. In addition to this painting right here by the Italian artist Marco Liberri, which depicts Zeus taking the form of an eagle in pursuit of the Titan goddess of divination Asteria, who should be Barbeleth in Genshin Impact. In the video itself, I say that whether the sinner is Vedrfolnir, Nibelung, or someone else, we are likely going to know by the end of Natlan. and a few hours later it was actually confirmed to be Vedrfolnir. Now this taught me a lesson. From here onwards, I'm going to be taking Greek mythology way more seriously in Genshin Impact. Not that I didn't before, it's just that now I'm gonna be taking it even more seriously. But Vedrfolnir isn't the only one Dane mentions. He talks about 4 others: Hroptatyr, Rheindaughter, Sortalogi, and Rerir. Earlier in the video, I made the bold claim that the 5 Sinners of Khaenri'ah are unlikely to be playable, so let me explain. First of all, it's not impossible for some, or heck, even all 5 of them to end up being playable in some capacity. Just unlikely. And the reason I say it is unlikely is because of who I think the 5 of these are supposed to be inspired by, and therefore by extension what that implies regarding their role in the story. The language and tone that Dainsleif uses to introduce the 5 Sinners of Khaenri'ah makes them sound eerily similar to the Pygmy Lords from Dark Souls series. I have talked about them before on this channel, but in case you are unfamiliar with the Pygmy Lords, they are essentially a group of human kings who divided amongst themselves the largest fragments of the Dark Soul of humanity, which in turn is a primordial flame that can manifest an ecosystem known as the Abyss, which sustains human life but is largely incompatible with most other creatures. Fearing their potential and the abyss that they carried with them, the king of the gods, the lord of sunlight, Gwyn, branded the humans with a ringed curse mark known as the Dark Sign, which prevents them from dying a true death. And the Pygmy Lords were subsequently sequestered into the Ringed City at the very end of the world with Gwyn's youngest daughter, Princess Filianor. Keep in mind that this was a heavily oversimplified summary of the lore, mainly to just introduce those who are unfamiliar with Dark Souls to the basics. Like I said, I will be going over the 5 Sinners of Khaenri'ah along with all the Dark Souls shenanigans in rigorous detail in my upcoming theory after this video. When it comes to the playability of the 5 Sinners, well, one of the most prominent symbols of humanity in Dark Souls is the Dark Sun of the Eclipse, which is a really nice coincidence because that happens to also be the exact same symbol of the ruling dynasty of Khaenri'ah, the nation of humanity in Genshin. Now, it is a well-known fact that much of Dark Souls is inspired by the manga series Berserk, and the symbolism of the eclipse is no exception. In Berserk, the eclipse is used as a motif for a group of 5 extremely evil individuals known as the God Hand. The 5 fingers of the God Hand serve a primordial entity called the Idea of Evil, which in Berserk is the god of the Abyss. And without going into too much detail in the interest of time, hopefully you guys can see just how stupidly similar this is to the 5 Sinners of Genshin. Like, it's essentially a copy-pasta at this point. As expected, the God Hand are also a reoccurring archetype across all of Hidetaka Miyazaki's games, where the roles are carried out by a different group of characters depending on the game. But one thing that remains consistent, no matter what the game we are talking about is that these 5 individuals are always, with no exception, always hunted down and killed by the player. And it's not like this is an optional thing. You literally cannot progress through the game unless you kill them. In Dark Souls, you go after the gods. In Dark Souls 3, you go after the Lords of Cinder. In Elden Ring, you go after Marika's children. Your goal is to always hunt them down, kill them, rip what is theirs from their bodies, and make it your own. That's how you finish the games. Does this mean the 5 Sinners will absolutely never be playable? No, at the end of the day, it is completely up to Hoyoverse what they do with them. For example, they could all be killed and still be playable. I am sure they would sell regardless. Nonetheless, I am just saying, if Hoyo chooses to go with the Miyazaki route, then you can say goodbye to them from now. At any rate, for some other minor but definitely interesting details that I want to quickly talk about. 1. Dainsleif mentions one other figure aside from the 5 Sinners, whom he calls the Vinster King. That guy is most likely King Ermin, because in Chinese he is called He Wang, which translates to Black King, which I assume means Black Sun King, and that should be Ermin. 2. This might come as a surprise to some of you, but out of the 5 Sinners, the one I want you to keep an eye out for the most is actually the Moon Hunter, Rerir. I highly suspect that we are going to hear about him, or maybe even see him if we are lucky sometime in Natlan, because his nickname is Rasher of Solnari, which translates to Avenger of the Sun. 3. I think that disconnecting the Traveler from the player was a good move by Hoyoverse, because back in the days when the game came out, there was this perception that the Traveler was a player self-insert, which led to problems regarding the Traveler's morality. 4. Caribert's realm of consciousness is extremely similar to the eternal oasis that Amun made from Nabu Malikata. The Abyss Sibling tells the traveler that the appearance of Caribert's domain is a reflection of his pure heart and kind soul. This is interesting if you think about it, because Sibilla, who was a Seelie just like Nabu Malikata, is stated to have had a very kind soul and only wished to grant everyone in the world happiness. So the eternal oasis looking almost identical to Caribert's domain might be an indication of Nabu Malikata's nature, potentially revealing that she was a very innocent and pure soul. 5. Caribert tells us that he does not exist outside of people's memories. This makes his situation identical to that of Penacony's bellboy Misha from Honkai Star Rail, who could only exist in the dream realm due to being a remnant of Mikhail the Watchmaker's consciousness. 6. By the end of the Archon Quest, we see just how much of an absolute Giga Chad legend Caribert truly is. Knowing that Aether and Lumine would not be able to retain the memory of their encounter with each other due to the realm of consciousness collapsing after he fades away, Caribert leaves them with one last gift. A single snapshot of the reunion to serve as a reminder that they met there and talked to each other, with one final note telling them to get along. And if you think that he forgot about Atossa, he didn't. He also left her a letter too, apologizing for making her know him and asking her to remember their time together. And yeah, that's pretty much all I have to say about this Archon Quest. Overall, I think it was a pretty damn good quest. However, there is one major criticism I thought about. Despite the fact that the Archon Quest itself was good and it makes sense, I feel like the concepts being introduced in it might get very annoying in the future, because Hoyoverse are now adding a lot of bullshit layering to the story that overcomplicates things. From now on, we have to move forward with the possibility that the traveler's entire journey might unironically be someone's dream or memory, which they are trapped in after being sealed by the Sustainer of Heavenly Principles. Alternatively, it's also possible that our journey across to that has been heavily altered by an outside force, and what we saw happen in-game so far is not what we actually did in reality, just like how Caribert kept implanting a sequence of false memories into Dainsleif's mind to make him remember things differently. And I could go on and on with this. For example, the traveler might be living in someone's dream, and the dreamer themselves might be in the dream of someone else, and then that person's memory could be getting tampered with, while all the people in the dream think that their memories are being tampered with, when in reality they are all part of one big dream soup. I think you get what I mean. There is a possibility for anything with such a plotline, which honestly can be a very huge advantage, or even a really big detriment depending on how it is used. But hopefully Hoyoverse doesn't over-exaggerate their usage of the dream bullshit. I think that as long as they don't go beyond what Mamoru Oshii does in The Angel's Egg, then the story of Genshin will be fine. Anyway, we still have a lot of stuff to talk about, because in terms of lore and world building, this patch is absolutely stacked, son. And this recent Archon Quest, Bedtime Story, confirmed and disproved a number of lore theories I made around Genshin Impact. So we will be discussing all of that in the upcoming few lore videos. Thank you all for watching, and a massive thanks to everyone who supports this channel on Patreon. For now, I've been My Name for Now, and I will see you very soon, actually. Take care.